Parliament, and we just had the budget on Friday. But I would just like to also tell you that this idea of the series is not so much to discuss only about budget. In fact, we may not even talk about the budget. It's a little bit longer term discussion. So the idea is to talk about restructuring of the Malaysian economy. I'm sure many of you, just like me, last April, May, we were hearing a lot from everybody about the need for us to use this COVID-19 period as a period to try to restructure things, to make changes. And I think that's the idea behind the series. Yeah. So today, that's the purpose. We want to talk about restructuring the Malaysian economy. We may not finish all issues today. In fact, I don't think we can. And we may have further sessions like today, where we will talk about the economy as well. Yeah. But there will be also other areas. So I think that's about it for everybody. Just to give a very, very brief background into this futures series roundtable that we are talking about, and we have a group of us. We are talking about naming it Futures Malaysia. So this is, I think, what we are hoping to set up. And all of you who are attending, you're welcome to join us in our Futures series. So with that, thank you very much. I hand it back to Said.
Terima kasih banyak, Prof. Aslam. And of course, we have a host of speakers and commentators whom I'm sure will share their invaluable insights on tonight's agenda. And I'm sure, in fact, this is not the first time that we are dealing with the topic of restructuring Malaysia's economy. Personally, I can still remember clearly almost every time when we encountered economic turmoil, particularly in the late 90s, in the early 2000s, and also in the midst of 2000, and now with 4IR at the background, we are sure to see many more changes in the dynamics of economy itself. And in fact, every time when we encountered such economic turmoil, we keep on saying that where there is crisis, there is opportunity. But then again, we have yet to graduate from discussing this. And tonight we're discussing this again. Perhaps we have quite a broad idea of what needs to be done, but still we are still lacking perhaps maybe political will. But it's not for me to discuss, because we have our panel speakers to deliberate on this subject matter. And allow me to introduce our speaker. The first speaker is Farhana Roslan. So Farhana is here. Farhana is currently a final year graduate student at JFK School of Government. Previously, she was a financial analyst at PNB and was seconded to the Prime Minister's office. She is currently a visiting fellow of Research for Social Advancement, and she studied accounting and finance student, but she later shifted to public policy upon joining UNDP in 2013. Our second speaker is Tricia Yeoh. Tricia is the CEO of Ideas, and currently she is also a PhD candidate at the School of Politics, History and International Relations at the University of Nottingham, Malaysia campus. Tricia was also the director of ASLI and had extensive policy advocacy experience. She is also the columnist of The Sun, Penang Monthly, and also Selangor Time. And last, of course, but not least, our final speaker is Professor K.S. Jomo. Prof. Jomo is, everybody knows, a prominent Malaysian economist. He needs no further introduction to all economists around. He's currently the senior advisor at the Khazanah Research Institute, also a visiting fellow at Columbia University, and also an adjunct professor at IIIUM. And Prof. Jomo has served at the as the UN's Assistant Secretary General for UN's Department of Economic and Social Affairs. And then he was appointed as the Assistant Director General at the Food and Agriculture Organization, ended in the year of 2015. Now, following speaker's presentation, we have 5 commentators altogether, namely, and in order of presentation. The first commentator is Professor Dr. Saadiah Mohamad from Forum Ekonomi Manusiawi, followed by Yang Berhormat Nik Nazmi Ahmad, Ahli Parlimen Setiawangsa from Parti Keadilan. And also we have with us the third commentator, Yang Berhormat Senator Haji Ismail Yusof, member and board of director of IDE. And also joining us is UMNO Info Chief Shahril Sufian Hamdan, and Prof. Muhammad Aslam Muhammad Hanif from Department of Economics, who is also the organizer and the host of this program tonight, will also be, in fact, going to be the final commentator. But before we begin, please allow me to briefly explain the format. Each speakers are given 10 minutes to present, and followed by 5 minutes comment from each commentators. I will prompt each speaker and commentators once the time limit ended. And each commentators will be reflecting on the pointers deliberated by the speakers within that time frame, which is only 5 minutes. So all in all, for us to finish all the speakers as well as the commentators, that amounts to almost 1 hour already. Immediately after which, we will open the floor for all participants, particularly those who are here in our Zoom platform, will be able to share their thoughts. But since perhaps maybe we'll just allow the most 2 minutes each. But ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let us all move on to our first presentation. 10 minutes, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Farhana Roslan.
Thank you so much to the organizers. Assalamualaikum everyone. Thank you for tuning in tonight. Thank you to IDE, Darul Ihsan, Selangor, and IIIUM for inviting me today. And I must say that it's such an honor to speak next to such distinguished speakers such as Tricia and Professor Jomo, or Dr. Jomo, who's really, and I was informed that this is the 5th session that Prof. Jomo is doing for today. So kudos, Dr. Jomo, for your energy still. I understand that the discussion today is meant to plant a seed for further discussions in the future, right, as Dr. Aslam mentioned earlier. And I have the task of setting up our conversation and kicking off our conversation tonight. So I thought that, I thought very hard what we could talk about when it comes to restructuring the economy. It's not a new topic. But before we talk about how, which I think we will discuss in the coming sessions with the other speakers, I thought I should make a case of why we should restructure the economy. And this reason actually predates COVID. This is a situation that has called, Malaysia is actually in a situation that has called for a restructuring of the economy even before COVID. So apatah lagi lepas COVID ni, bukan lepas lah COVID ni, kita tak tahu bila lepas dia. But with the coming of COVID, then it's highly important that we think about this very seriously. And the reason and the how and the why, sorry, I was talking about why, and the why that we need to restructure or think about restructuring the economy is actually much more relevant to you and me and Makcik Kias and the sons of Makcik Kias more than we realize. And that issue is actually has to do with wages, which means that the urgency of this topic, now that we are entering the realm of significant informal employment, brought about by technology, but also now COVID, makes it really, really important. And I want to start at a graph that I saw. Personally, this is a graph that sticks with me. And this is a picture or a graph that I saw in the Bank Negara Annual Report 2018. And this has stayed with me for a while since I saw it early in 2019. And I think maybe I can ask organizer Cik Khairul to just show that simple graph. The very first one, the very simple one. So maybe we can blow it up a little. This chart too, right? So full credits to Bank Negara, none are mine. But this picture stayed with me because essentially for every $1, because we want to make sure the comparison is the same, kita guna dollar, right? So $1 of the GDP that Malaysia produced, we only earn 35 cents, Malaysian workers. Whereas benchmark economies, which we can see there, US, UK, Australia, Germany, even Singapore, every worker will receive about 50 cents to every dollar of the output shared. Just the first page, please. Let's stick on that picture for a while. Yeah, just stay here. Yeah, let's stay here. So what does that mean really? What contributes to this gap? For the longest time, I actually know of this number much earlier on in my career, back when I was a research analyst. And the number was actually 33% dulu. Maknanya every $1 that Malaysia produces, 33 cents would go to the worker. And I used to blame the capitalists. I thought, this must be the fault of business owners. They want to, they are the one earning most of the profits. This goes to the capital owners, and capital input. And it was not until this report by Bank Negara that really made me think more nuanced about this problem, right? And And there is two findings actually. So number one, the first finding is actually that wages, Bank Negara found with their very clever analysis of the GDP deflator adalah dia buat the statistical work, but they found that wages have actually increased faster to employers compared to employees. And then the prices of the good that employers feel they are selling, so businesses are selling goods, they feel that the price are so slow, it's not going up, whereas we are complaining about cost of living. So we are saying that essentially we are complaining that costs are high, cost of living is high, but then firms are saying, oh, I cannot sell my prices, my goods too expensively. Whereas we complain our wages are too low juga on the flip side. And then the employers are saying, look, I cannot do business anymore, I cannot maintain my margin, minimum wages keep going up. So there is obviously a mismatch lah between businesses and workers and wages, owners of labor capital. And then secondly, what they found was that while we think that because a little of this share is going to labor, we might think that naturally this must mean go to capital inputs, right? So labor is one input into production. So kita buat business, satu input is labor, then the other input is capital. We would think that sebab labor kurang, gaji yang pergi kat labor kurang, maybe banyak return kepada capital input lah, istilah financial capital ke ataupun hard capital. But this is not quite true for Malaysia. In fact, most of the economic activities that we are involved in is significantly lower than benchmark economies ni lah. So but yet the share of labor income is small. Maybe we can go to the next page. Boleh flip to the next slide ke? Yeah, this is the same one and next one. Right, so if we see here, most of the sectors that we're involved in, most of the time the ratio of wages to the amount that we produce is, for the benchmark economies is higher and Malaysia is lower lah. Except for most are going to construction. So that's actually something that is telling juga. Okay, the slides is the next one that I want to sort of highlight. The next one, please. And this is the final one, I promise. Sorry, another one. There is a before this. Sorry about. Okay, tak apa. I don't think I'm not seeing the diagram. So what essentially happened is that even though the businesses that Malaysia, the economic activities that Malaysia are involved in are using more less labor, so we are not using so much labor, but they are also not capital intensive, and we are actually involved in a lot of services sector, right, such as finance, real estate, insurance, wholesale, retail trade, transportation, ICT. But the total share of the pie that is going to workers is actually low. So this is counterintuitive lah, like I mentioned just now, because naturally if you have a higher labor sort of sectors, such as these sectors, then we would have much more would go to the labor lah. But of course I'm talking about the total pie, maknanya the whole GDP sector that's going to the labor bukan per person. So per person may not actually earn much income in these sectors. So what is really the problem? And the main finding that the BNM found was that almost 36%, maknanya almost 40% of the improvement in labour share to Malaysia's GDP, which has increased very slowly daripada 33 sen awal tahun dulu 2010 sampai 2017 is about 35 sen, 2 sen je naik. And this is attributed to sectors that are labour intensive. So maknanya ekonomi Malaysia, we have shifted from slightly more capital intensive kepada yang lebih labour intensive. Tapi yet ekonomi sektor kita dah pindah ke yang lebih intensive, labour tidak mengalami wages yang higher. I mean, we're not experiencing in total the wages are not that much growing to labour themselves. So what comes to mind to me in this sense is what one of my professors lah dekat sekolah, Professor Danny Roderick, I think you're familiar with him, Prof Jomo, And he said that he coined this term of premature deindustrialization, where even very poor countries are now involved in services, right? So if we know that Malaysia ni the largest pie of the economic pie goes to are actually involved in services sectors. So I think we can turn off this slide lah. And as we know, these services that we are in are not very high level services, right? They're not as high as the developed world, and most are petty and informal trade activities like menjual makanan, the wholesale trade, motor repairs and things like that. So it's services, right? Tapi it's not really the high, very intense, ICT sector of services, the education, we're not exporting education as much. So this, I think, is the key that I want to bring up to Dila. So this, I hope, paints the picture before even COVID, why we need to think really about structuring the economy. So if anything, when the government of Malaysia is thinking about RMK12, and plus, we are also facing COVID-19 as a anomaly within our growth trajectory ini. It is really important that, my recommendation is that Malaysia government would look at two areas of serious, structural reform and structural, changes. One is, of course, the direction of the economy. And I know that, sometimes we fear about the idea of, government intervening in businesses, right? And so how we do it is still up for debate, of course. COVID has meant that a lot of people, households, and also businesses look towards the government for answers, for assistance, for help, right? But then when we talk about recovery and growth, we become so worried about the government being too involved in the projection of the economic growth lah. This is a business for this is for businesses to think about. The private sector, the market will drive know best where to go in the future, nak pergi digital ke, nak pergi knowledge economy ke, nak pergi green technology ke dan sebagainya. This is something only business sector can decide lah. Government shouldn't meddle, government should just support, right? But I think as a country that's facing such a structural, very we are stuck in what we like to call the middle income trap, whether or not is it true or not. We are stuck in low-end manufacturing, premature deindustrialization, petty services. I think the government has a role to play, and this is what at REFSA we believe lah, that the government has to have very clear strategic ideas about where to take the economy next, because even in preparing our labour market, budak-budak nak study kat mana kan, nak prepare, contohnya nak provide PT-PTN loan, mungkin PT-PTN tu pun satu cara kita boleh arahkan student kan, macam mana ke sektor mana dan sebagainya. Kita government tak ada idea langsung, tak boleh biar saja, kena ada sikit strategi kat mana area jobs kita nak fokus kan. And then secondly would be structural reform in the social protection area lah, and this one memang dah ramai orang dah katakan, our social protection needs a serious relook. A lot of people quote a number of 40%, so out of every 10 Malaysians, 40% memang tak ada apa-apa bentuk perlindungan langsung. And yang 60% tu pun is this government civil service yang ada medical free and pension. And then some of us yang ada EPF ni, itu pun sufficiency of EPF, we know EPF will only last us for 3 years, right?
Farhana, 10 minutes.
Okay, so this is where I stop. This is our recommendations basically. So I hope that lays the ground well for how we can restructure the economy. Thank you.
Terima kasih Farhana. She started out by sharing the big why. Let's move on quickly to our second speaker, Tricia Yeoh. Tricia, if you please.
Terima kasih, saya Munawar, and salam sejahtera kepada semua. Terima kasih kepada Institut Darul Ihsan Selangor dengan IIIUM kerana menjemput saya datang malam ni. So I'd like to share some slides as well dengan izin. Let me just find it. Okay. So I thought that I would actually focus just on one area because we only have 10 minutes. And I do want to focus on GLCs. I like Farhana's introduction, and Farhana made a case for why restructure and the fact that wages are not rising. And I would like to offer a sort of case for sort of making an answer why that is the case by focusing on GLCs. So let me just get this going and then we can look at this. So I'm going to look at why GLCs need to be restructured and reformed. I will give you a bit of background on the landscape, the existing governance bodies, reform efforts so far, but why these are not enough and what we would recommend. So just some background, right? So we know that GLCs, at least this is slightly dated data, so we need to update it, but GLCs employ 5% of the national workforce, accounting for 36% and 54% of market caps. So in a sense, it does form a significant share of the economy, but yet only employs 5% of the national workforce. We know that GLCs are dominant in certain industries like utilities, transportation, and warehousing. And the government has, attempted to look at the role of GLCs in the economy over the years. In 2005, it said that, okay, we need to clarify the GLC mandate in the context of national development. So there was a recognition then already that GLCs play a role, but it seemed that there was a need to clarify because it seemed to be not clear. What do they play in terms of national development? And I should stop there by saying that actually in Malaysia, GLCs have done a huge role. They've played a huge role, like, Petronas has done a lot of scholarship programs. Petronas itself has contributed a lot of revenues to our country, right? So why are we still asking that question? But yet in the NEM, New Economic Model, it said that GLCs should operate on a strict commercial basis, free of government interference. So that was in 2010. And since then, they tried to divest the GLCs, but I think that the divestment also didn't really go according to plan. Muhyiddin has said this year that the GLCs are important in helping the government formulate comprehensive strategy during COVID-19 as well as after. And most recently, the budget speech on Friday said that GLCs are to provide 15,000 jobs as part of the job creation plan. Now, our research actually shows that GLCs have historically not been able to provide jobs very efficiently. So one question there is actually, what kind of jobs will be available in these 15,000, and who exactly are the ones who are going to make those decisions? So why do they need to be restructured? They form a heavy presence in the Malaysian economy, sometimes competing with the private sector. So we know that there are some GLCs that are actually, in a sense, they are not black in the books. So they continue to operate in the red, but yet, both at the federal and state levels, they get compensated for, even though they are non-performing. So the question is, why should these ones that are not performing be allowed to be maintained, whereas the money that government is using to support these GLCs should be, redirected for more social objective reasons. Some GLCs do serve social objectives. I mentioned earlier, like Petronas. A lot of the GLCs have been used for vendor development programs, including Bumiputra and procurement, allocating Bumiputra participation in projects. But I think an audit still needs to be done to investigate if they have correctly and efficiently served their purpose. So, over the years that GLCs have been used to serve social objectives, have they actually done what they said that they would? And of course, from a governance angle, there's also very little scrutiny. We know that the boards of directors don't provide robust oversight. There's still a lot of political appointments to boards and the chairs. So let me go on. Oh yes, of course, we know that was also something that the past SecGen said, that all MPs not holding government positions to be made GLC heads. And why is that problematic? That's problematic because when they are made the heads of GLCs, they are making decisions on behalf of the entire commercial entity. And sometimes there's conflict of interest there, and they may not be using the GLCs for the right purposes. And this actually causes, some dysfunction within the way that the economy is structured. Okay, so this chart, I was looking at what Farhana shared earlier, and this chart is from the labor force survey, and it shows you, employed persons by status in employment and ethnicity as of last year, and you can see that actually much fewer Bumiputra are in the employer category compared to the Chinese, right? So what that means is that, in fact, there should be a lot more focus on enterprise development. And why enterprise development? Because that is one of the ways in which wages can actually rise. You know that if you are an employee, your wages rise much, much slower compared to if you are an employer, where your wages can rise faster. So yeah, I'm sure there'll be some discussion over this chart later, but I'll just move on for now. Okay, I have a couple of slides on governance. It's not exact, well, it is related to the question that we're asking today, but not exactly. But I think it's very important, because if you don't address governance, then you don't address efficiency, and therefore you cannot get the right structure of the intended, economic outcomes that you want. So why GLCs are important. We know that there have been a lot of scandals like 1MDB and Mara, and we know that this led to the change of government, partially so. So yeah, we had the big financial scandal, one of the biggest in the world. We also have had a more recent one with the Mara building scandal. But I want to tell you about the landscape, because not many people understand that actually when we say GLCs, we're actually referring to state-owned enterprises. And in Malaysia, we have 3 different kinds of categories. I apologize if it is technical, but I think it's good for this audience to see that there is no centralized agency that owns and governs SOEs. And in fact, there are very different ways that they are treated. So you have a GLC that is legislated by the Companies Act, and it's regulated by the Companies Commission and the Securities Commission if they are listed. They can be owned directly by government through MOF Inc., but also indirectly through other means. Then you have another category called statutory bodies, and these are legislated for in Parliament. So the Auditor General, and there's a minister in charge of it. And then you have GLICs as well, which are incorporated under different legal forms. Why is this important? It's because this provides you the governance structure of who actually has the responsibility to make sure that all of these companies are running efficiently for and on behalf of the rakyat of Malaysia. So these are just the governing bodies that I mentioned earlier. The next few slides, I'm just going to show you what are some of the reforms that government has tried to do with regards to GLCs, and then I'm going to end with some policy recommendations, right? So we have the National Anti-Corruption Plan, and the NACP actually has as one of its objectives greater transparency over who owns and controls corporate entities. So this is really important, because if you don't have a register of who owns and controls corporate entities, then you can actually allow these GLCs to slide down a slippery slope and not be monitored, and then you may have another 1MDB or Mara, which then completely doesn't fulfill the social objective, right? A lot of public money is pumped into these entities, but yet they don't result in good outcomes. So I won't go through this. You can actually look at the NACP yourself, but there were supposed to be some things done even by December this year, and it's already November. So of course, we know that there was a change in government, so some of these things cannot have been done so quickly. Okay, a big thing happened this year, which is that we have Section 17A that was amended in the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission. It means that any corporate organization that has corruption offences, they can be liable under the Act. So this requires them to behave with integrity and without corruption. I'll just, briefly say that, yeah, of course, the publicly listed companies have higher stringent measures. So you can imagine that, Petronas, Telecom, and so on, they have more stringent measures. But there's a whole slate of other GLCs at the federal and the state levels that are not accounted for. And yes, Malaysia has improved on some of the indicators, like the Corporate Governance Association and so on, but I still think there's a lot to do. So these are my final 2 slides and recommendations. So number one, there's a need to evaluate the role of GLCs in the economy, especially in Bumiputra economic development. As I mentioned earlier, looking at that chart, I believe that Bumiputra development should focus on enterprise development. So making sure that the conditions are right, that the small business owners, your informal workers, your makcik kia and everyone down the street, they will be able to flourish and get them the right environments to flourish. We should also evaluate the vendor development programs. Have they been doing well? Are they actually developing new vendors, or are they merely benefiting the same set of vendors that have been benefited over the years? I think there's a need to streamline the GLCs as well, so conduct an audit of all the GLCs. We don't know, for instance, how many GLCs exist in the country at the moment. Like, nobody knows, including Ministry of Finance. I find that very peculiar. And I believe, and that's our opinion, that underperforming GLCs that are a strain on public finances should be abolished. The position that we take is that government still has a role to play, and those that are performing well should remain. This one could be controversial. I think we should provide data on salaries of all GLC chairs and board of directors. Ultimately, they are public entities, and this would help to improve public accountability. And we should set up a GLC's policy office. IDEAS normally represents Malaysia in this state-owned enterprise governance body organized by the OECD. And we know that other countries actually have their own policy office, and they have a strategic plan. So, Malaysia is actually falling behind on that count. We also believe that the social protection function of GLCs should be transferred to suitable institutions, so that GLCs, the economic and social objectives of GLCs are not mixed together, because it can cause some confusion. And there also should be a GLC Governance Act. Just 4 more, we should have reforms in the institutions, Judiciary, Parliament, Election Commission, and Public Service, to have oversight over GLCs. We should have autonomy. So there should be, strictly speaking, a separation of roles between the state as the owner and the manager of the SOE. And this is in line with the OECD guidelines. So this is international standards. Appointment of boards, I think this one goes without saying, that should be based on merit and qualifications. And finally, the enforcement agency to eliminate political interference within GLCs. So there's a lot more to say about restructuring the economy, but I just wanted to focus on GLCs here as an answer to the question of why wages are not rising, or rather one answer to the question. There are many answers, and this answer essentially tries to make the argument that it's because GLCs have been allowed to exist inefficiently for a long time, and they have become, basically it's an inefficient allocation of public funds. Yeah,
thank you very much, Tricia. I'm sure we have a lot to say. And in fact, I would like to welcome our viewers on Facebook as well as YouTube to post questions. We started having questions from Afzai Nizam and Suguna later on, inshallah, if we still have the time. So everybody now is referring to Makcik Kia as an anecdote. I'm not sure whether Prof. Jomo is going to use the same analogy or not. So let's just move on swiftly to Prof. Jomo. Please welcome Prof. Jomo. Prof? Yes, Prof, please.
Assalamualaikum and good evening. Thank you very much for the kind invitation to be here today. I would like to take this opportunity to talk not about my preference for a future, but rather about what I think is now feasible. Because I think we are now at a very, very crucial junction, brought about by factors beyond our control, the crisis, the pandemic, and the responses to the pandemic, not only by governments, but also by enterprises. So we have seen, for example, that supply chains have been disrupted by the pandemic, and we have also seen how governments, such as the Japanese government and the US government under Trump, asked their enterprises to withdraw investing in China. Now, because we are exposed to China, and we are very integrated with the Chinese economy, this has had very adverse consequences. Of course, some people say that, oh, maybe some of those companies out of China will come here. Yes, maybe 2 or 3 will come here, but the vast majority are unlikely to come here for a whole variety of reasons, and many of them are going to be onshore. So I think we have to consider that our economy has always been restructured. From time to time, it has been restructured and changed in very fundamental ways, which are, in my view, historically problematic, mainly because we do not seem to recognize, we do not seem to have an appreciation for economic historical processes. So if we think, for example, about how the economy was transformed by colonialism, Sultan Nazrin, for example, has written 2 books which help us to better understand this, but there's also been earlier work by other people. Then we have the transformations which have taken place during the post-colonial period. I've tried to distinguish, for example, between the early post-colonial period under Tunku Abdul Rahman, basically more or less the colonial economy plus, and then transformations which took place with the NEP. But very importantly, many people associated with the NEP, there were very important changes when Malaysian industrialization strategy changed during this period. And of course, the end of the Bretton Woods system, thanks to Richard Nixon at that time, meant that the international environment changed. So we are often not very conscious about how these changes have been taking place. But I think for any serious evaluation, we will need to begin to understand how the world economy has changed, how the Malaysian economy has changed very much in response to that. So part of the problem in Malaysia is that we are obsessed with ethno-populism and ethno-populist agendas. And we see that most political parties in Malaysia after the 1960s have essentially been ethno-populist. They are no longer so-called ideological parties. And even if there are ideological groups which are campaigning, for example, Tricia leads ideas which takes a particular libertarian view of the economy and politics. They don't campaign as ideas. They go through the people they can influence and so on and so forth. Likewise with other groups as well. So we need to begin to understand that our primary focus on ethno-populism and its consequences has colored so many things. For example, we are not capable of having a serious discussion about the role of the state without thinking about, the state is largely controlled by the Malays in this country. Therefore, that colors our discussion. We need to begin to understand that the role of the state can be very decisive, has been very crucial in many situations, particularly in the context of late modernization or late industrialization. If you think about Japan, if you think about Singapore, you think about Korea, you think about Taiwan, and you think about China, of course. So all these are examples of how the state has played a very, very important role, but we tend to associate the state in this country, in most discussions, with particular ethno-populist agendas, and this, I think, has limited our ability to appreciate the larger issues at stake. Unfortunately, what has happened over the last couple of decades or so is that ethno-populism has become the dominant in the world, the most important political tendency in much of the world, whether we look at the rise of Mr. Trump or what has happened in many European countries, and of course the rise of Narendra Modi in India and other political developments. We have seen ethno-populism brushing aside the old thinking about whether it's liberal or social democrat, so on and so forth. So we have to take all this into account when we are trying to think seriously. Now, of course, the NEP, as I said, had some impact, and I would also like to emphasize that about 3 decades ago, Tun Mahathir had espoused the so-called Vision 2020 or Wawasan 2020, and it was, in my view, perhaps even more visionary than the NEP in many ways. Unfortunately, within less than a decade, it was abandoned, partly because of the Asian crisis, partly because of the fallout between Mahathir and Anwar and other factors which I don't have time to get into. And what we have seen is a perversion of it in the last decade, where becoming a developed economy, forming a Bangsa Malaysia has been associated very cynically with having a high income economy. So by pretending, for example, that we don't have 6 to 7 million foreign workers in this country, we reduce the denominator and we think we are close to, we are on the cusp of becoming a high income country. These are all very, indicates the relatively superficial character of much of the Malaysian economic discourse. So I would basically say that, as Farhana has reminded us, Malaysia unfortunately had a premature end to the industrialization thrust. But more importantly, the industrialization thrust was really largely due to foreigners locating themselves in Malaysia. The ability of Malaysians to drive their own industries was unfortunately lost, partly because of an obsession, of a focus, a singular focus, perhaps understandable with the Proton car project and so on and so forth. But I think it is very important to recognize, for example, that now Malaysia is the single largest exporter of photovoltaic solar panels to the US. But is there a single Malaysian company involved? No. The answer, unfortunately, is that it's mainly US companies, European companies, and Chinese companies. And it's not as if this technology is so difficult. The technology is relatively new. In fact, the Chinese companies only learned this technology about 10 to 15 years ago. If we, the number of components involved is basically less than 200 compared to more than 4,000 in the case of an automotive car. And we see a huge opportunity there. Likewise, over 3 decades ago, Yusuf Basirun, my old school friend, was the head of Porin. He announced, together with Tan Sri Augustine Ong, the advent of palm oil-based biodiesel. Did we go anywhere with that? No. Even now, people are resisting the introduction of biodiesel. There's no active promotion of biodiesel in this country, let alone internationally. And so on and so forth. But what has happened now with COVID-19, and this is why it's so important for us to think about this, is that whether we like it or not, COVID-19 is going to fundamentally transform some aspects of the Malaysian economy, whether we like it or not. Supply chains have been disrupted. Besides what I said about the US and the Japanese, there are other aspects of the supply chain which are being disrupted. Countries are now very, very concerned about food security in the traditional way. But Malaysia, we have had almost a century of talking about food security simply in terms of growing enough rice. We don't talk about having enough vegetables and so on and so forth. One of the studies some of my colleagues are involved with is going to show that although Malaysian life expectancy has gone up from 61 to about 75, the fact of the matter is that the last 10 years or 9.5 years at least of that life expectancy is not expected to be in good health. Okay, so the healthy average life expectancy is actually less than 75. It's somewhere in the region of about 65. And this should be a matter of concern. And part of the reason is because we are not eating well. It's not that, eating well doesn't mean we eat things which are sold by multinational companies and so on and so forth. We are not eating enough fruits and vegetables. And the variety of foods we're eating is not good enough. So we need to begin to think about the changes required in the economy in terms of what is feasible right now. And I think that it is very, very unfortunate that the discussion in the budget has no serious throwing billions of dollars at R&D projects which are not going to be realizable in the short term is not going to help, unfortunately. So I think I'm running out of time. Let me stop here and let's have a robust discussion on what is very important for the future of our country. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Terima kasih banyak, Prof. And of course, thank you very much for abiding by the time limit. You're right on the dot. So let's just swiftly move on to our commentators. I would like to invite Prof. Saadiah Mohamad from Forum Ekonomi Manusiawi. And please kindly abide by the 5 minutes allocation. Prof. Saadiah, silakan.
Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum and salam sejahtera. It's good to listen to you, Prof. Jomo, and also to the other speakers, Tricia and Farhana. In fact, I was using your book, Prof. Jomo, with my students, and so I think my students had some chance of learning the historical transformation of the Malaysian economy, at least. And not many people actually, when they talk about economy, would want to go into the history of this transformation and history of economic thought, for example. Now, but as an academic, although I was accused, I remember one time, Tricia probably remember when we were in Kuwait for the WIF, and I met a politician, and he said, the trouble with you people is that you're too academic. I said, well, I'm not academic. And I would like to raise about the importance of having a systems view, an integrated system view rather than a reductionist view. And I think in Malaysia and in a lot of schools and universities as well, because we want to shortcut, want to be quick, we don't really have the big picture. In other words, we don't have a way of thinking and the thinking process and the philosophy, if you like, a concept of trying to approach things, history and concept. And I think COVID and the challenges that we have now represents an opportunity for restructuring. Although even before COVID and the problems that Farhana mentioned, for example, about how wages and compensation in Malaysia have received such a much smaller proportion out of the $1 say GDP production in Malaysia. So you mentioned about 35 cents, yeah. And economists have been talking about this for a long time. And our own observation, I was talking to my children, for example, when we graduate in the 1980s, the income of a graduate is not much different from what a graduate is earning now, which is like 1,000 something or close to 1,000. That was what we got in 1980s. And yet, gold has increased, God knows how many times. And food, of course, yeah. So there is a disconnect from, we talk about inflation has been at historically low levels, and yet people are complaining about cost of living. Yeah, but the employers, yeah, you're right. You pointed out that also we heard in the parliament debate, and I at first don't want to believe when I look at the CEOs, how much CEOs are getting in Malaysia, the GLCs, and including Islamic banks and the subsidiaries, the takaful. I talk about inequality, and I have data on that, but it's still shocking to see that CEOs are getting like a few millions, 8 million, 10 millions in a year, yeah. And so restructuring has got to look at compensation of the employee, and then GLCs, yeah. And so this is a time, I think, a time for thinking about compensation issues and to bring in fiscal policy and taxation. Prof. Jomo mentioned about the US economy, and I mean we tend to look at those models, and it's also political economy, how polarized. You talk about the ethno-populist agenda, and it is not just Malaysia. This is, we also look at other places. I think the world is so polarized between the two. Sort of, one is the more liberal, universal values, embracing immigrants, embracing diversity, and the other one, the ethno-populist agenda. And I like to be hopeful. I like to be optimistic that I think the future is to embrace the agenda of sustainability, and this includes social sustainability. And if we were to have a social sustainability and all the SDGs, we need to be thinking beyond ethno-populist agenda, because we have to be thinking about peaceful coexistence in this world. We have to find that common denominator. What is it that we can think about? The principles of religious-based, faith-based Islamic economics or economic finance, but I think the common denominator will be the going back to humanitarian values, the humanity, the common values of the good old-fashioned trust and credibility, governance. You don't steal people's money, don't do corruption. So while we need to have all the big data and technology and whatnot, we need to be thinking about what is a new model. You need to be thinking about normal response, the new norms and the responses to that. Yes, we need to have these things, but we need to go back to the universal golden values, which unite everyone in the world. And so, where do we restructure? And I think it's also the kind of concept, the kind of model that we want to look at. And I'd like to raise about the various kinds of the variants of the alternative models. We talk about, you know, the ills of capitalism and the market, but of course we don't want to go, and we know the weaknesses of the socialists, the communists as well. But we know that socialist democracies have worked better, like the Nordic countries, and we know also about New Zealand, for example, strong leadership and you know, the solidarity from the politicians who at this time willing to you know, have pay cuts. And I think we would like to see that. I think the rakyat would like to see that in the Malaysian economy, of the solidarity of the top, you know, the top income bracket people, the CEOs who are getting millions in a year, so we'd like to see that already. And models like, I mean, I'm from the Forum Ekonomi Manusiawi. We'd like to promote the idea of an economy that is sustainable, both socially and finance, and all the SDGs, the 17 SDGs. Yeah, especially I like Prof Jomo's idea about the food and nutrition, which I really am into it, have a big interest into it. So the SDG number 12, for example, sustainable consumption and production. That, I think, I did not see the spirit of it in the recent agenda, in the recent budget. So we need to uplift the rakyat into thinking about that as well.
Thank you very much, Professor. It's already 7 minutes. I already been notified. So we've been mentioning about the policymakers. We have Yang Berhormat Nazmi in the house. So silakan, YB.
Assalamualaikum, selamat malam, my distinguished presenters, commentators, and the audience. Since I only have 5 minutes, I think if we look historically, whenever there is a crisis, governments, it can be a bad word. You know, we tend to treat governments, government intervention as something negative. But historically, whenever there's a crisis, we look at the World War I, World War II, even locally, we look at the 13 May 1969 ethnic riots. The government has responded to restructure the economy. So today, we are facing the immediate COVID crisis, which not only has a health fallout, but also a massive economic fallout. And, I agree that many of the issues, inequality, Farhana was talking about the wage structure that is in our economy. Many of those problems are already there. It's not something that's new. But COVID has exacerbated it. Not going to school means differently to someone who lives in a flat, in a PPR flat, or in a kampung in Sabah, compared to someone who can afford all the gadgets and with parents who can assist with his or her education. So this is where I think the government needs to play an active role. Specifically looking at the budget, I think it was a missed opportunity. Many things were pointing at the right direction, but it was not enough. Just looking at one part, the size of the deficit as a proportion to GDP is actually smaller than what the government did in 2009 after the global financial crisis. The size of the percentage of the deficit. So And this is, to me, is something that is really big. You know, the impact of COVID-19 on the country has been really massive, and we should take the opportunity to really restructure the economy. You know, going back, you know, things like the New Deal, you know, it came out from the Great Depression of 1929, and the US, the birth of the, you know, the baby boomers, the high percentage of Americans going to university were actually propelled by the veterans, the GIs who came back from the war, who were given free access to higher education. Similarly, Japan, Germany also restructured their economy heavily from the World War. You know, the problem that we have in Malaysia, we are still, I think we inherit a lot of the policies, you know, NEP, for example, in many ways it still shapes how we perceive the politics and economy of the country. Many of the policies that we have, for example, makes an assumption, you know, just to promote urbanization at all costs, which made sense, I think, in the 1970s. Because at that time, you know, the idea is that the good schools are in the cities, even if there's quarters or whatnot, it's fine. You know, as long as they're in the cities, they get good jobs. That when we were starting to industrialize. But now, for example, the government is just starting to recognize the problem of urban poverty. Urban poverty, you know, you are earning 3,000 ringgit. My constituents who are earning 3,000 ringgit living in flats, you know, they are struggling to make a living, just as difficult as those who are earning 1,500 ringgit in Kelantan or in Sabah. Or even, I mean, let's not talk about Kuala Lumpur. The cost of living in Kota Kinabalu and Kuching are much higher than the cost of living in the rural areas in Sabah and Sarawak, for example. So the policies that we have need to be shaped. We've seen the figures from UNICEF about child poverty, about malnutrition, about stunting, and it's scary because, you know, we tend to be in our bubble. You can say it's a Setiawangsa bubble or Bangsa bubble or whatever bubble, a Klang Valley bubble, that we miss what's happening out there, you know, and I think that's where we really need to intervene. And the danger is that, you know, why Donald Trump, for example, succeeded. And let's face it, he's immensely popular in the US, even in the last presidential elections, is because that the poor people are feeling left out and they will look for scapegoats. And I think that is something scary for a country like Malaysia that's multiracial, and where we, as rightly pointed by Prof. Jomo, where the ethno-centric narrative still shapes our discourse to this day. So I think that is where we really need to address, and the focus should really be on closing the gap between the rich and the poor in the country.
Terima kasih, YB. That was right on the dot. Moving on swiftly to our next commentator. Please welcome Yang Berhormat Senator Ismail Yusof. YB. YB Ismail.
Yeah, Assalamualaikum. I'm
silakan
to unmute.
Okay.
First, thank you for inviting me to be part of this discussion, restructuring of Malaysian economic, and I feel very enlightened listening to the speakers, especially, and personally, you know, as a person with a background of human resource, of course, definitely I don't have the authority to touch much on how about the restructuring of the Malaysian economy in the context of what being discussed from the economic side of it. But I'm looking into before that, I think I would like to thank Farhana and also Tricia, because when they talk about the Farhana talk about the wages and the labor market, and Tricia is talking about DLC providing the balance between providing job opportunity and about the growth, the economic growth. At the end of the day, it's about the human capital model that we are having now. Are we going to survive in this the future economic structure with the present human capital model that we are human capital development model that we are having now in the market. Because as it is now with this pandemic around, people are losing job. As it is, the statistic is almost 1 million. And then don't forget, there are about 300,000 college and university leavers every year entering the job market. And the notion that we have in the labor market is about, you know, the corporate organization, you know, the corporate enterprise. They are the one that dictate what are they are the creators of job, if I can use that term, and they dictate about how the job market is going to be. And for me, looking into the restructuring of future economic, we have to hand in hand look into how we also have to revisit and rethink again about our human capital development model for the future of work. And of course, the common theme, you know, the concern over the acceleration of digitalization of goods and services led to the creative destruction of jobs. Many jobs will disappear because of technologies will have to take over. And with that, I think we should look into what are the alternative human capital development model that we should create or undertake so that we prepare the human capital to fit into the job market that we have now. Finally, what I would like to wrap up with this short discussion that I have of 5 minutes. The issue now is whether such a concept about giving the corporation, enterprise, and people who are in the industries to decide whether what kind of employment approach that they need, rather than we look at the educational skill employment approach, which is, I think, more preferable for us to reorientate, to do a reorientation untuk melihat semula the human capital development model in order to cater the dynamic of the change in the economic sector. Finally, maybe we should begin to visualize a more realistic future labor market in line with, I think, the IR 4.0 or maybe the digitized economy. Sorry, I think for short, I think that's from me. Thank you.
Terima kasih banyak, YB. Moving on to Shahril Hamdan, the UMNO Information Chief. Sila, Shahril.
Sure. Assalamualaikum and good evening. Thanks IDE and the organizers for inviting. For me, my intervention here would be to persuade us to perhaps be quite strict and clear what our desired outcomes are. If we can say, for example, our desired outcomes are to combat unemployment, in fact, aim for zero unemployment, for higher wages, for lower inequality, building a care economy, a more caring economy, and building a sustainable economic development model, then I think that begins to chart, open up certain paths that we might have to choose from. I think one of the troubles that we face, at least in my lifetime, which isn't very long, is that Malaysia isn't always clear what its desired outcomes are, and its prioritization has never been something that we're great at. Given that is, for example, 4 or 5 outcomes that I personally feel is worthwhile going for. Underpinning how we get there must be, I think, a readiness to reject neoliberalism and its precepts. That's a big shout that I'm throwing out for perhaps discussion after this. And that means getting away from this deficit phobia. That means getting away from this 1980s Reagan Thatcherite way of thinking about how all state intervention must be and necessarily is bad by definition. And therefore have a very clear sense of what levers need to be pulled to get to those outcomes. Farhana started off our discussion talking about low wages, so that's, you know, incidentally also something I feel strongly about. 35%, if I'm not mistaken, wage to GDP ratio. It's okay, but nowhere close to what we want to be. I could be wrong, but I imagine if only 35% of income goes to workers, by definition, the rest goes to the state. Much more goes to shareholders, and that's not okay. That's not economy that I envision for, you know, my daughter's generation. Therefore, if we think that that's not okay, what are the steps that we might have to take, given again that we accept the underpinning rejection of neoliberal precepts? And that means really entertaining the idea of increasing wages through any number of levers or measures. Minimum wage is the thing that always the first thing that comes to mind, and then you have MEF folks and all the rest of that gang immediately jumping and saying that that's not okay. I think, you know, folks like Prof Jomo will be far more qualified to advise if the data actually shows minimum wage increases always leads to unemployment, which I don't believe it does. So that'd be one, you know, obvious lever that we look at. I'm a big fan in more recent times of the job guarantee, which I've written and talked about quite frequently recently, in which the state basically provides jobs. The state basically accepts the need to increase deficits, if it means providing income to people while they produce output, which is, you know, different from UBI, where all monies are given to people without necessarily them producing output. So that will be one radical step to take, which will immediately combat unemployment, immediately combat our suppressed and depressed wages, because as I think many people in the room understand, if you give a living wage via the job guarantee program, then necessarily the private sector will need to then compete to take labor away from that program. We've spoken about, Tricia spoke a lot about GLC roles and the transformation and structural reforms that will be required. I think no one has a quarrel there in terms of governance, in terms of you know, ensuring that there's more transparency. Perhaps what's more productive in this line of thought that I'm forwarding is, again, focus on what exactly we want GLCs to do, and accept that there might be different roles for different types of GLCs. But that transparency, to Tricia's point, and that clarity of what GLC roles are is absent. And therefore, it is susceptible to the political exigencies of the moment. If a particular you know, exigency comes to be present, then GLC suddenly becomes a vehicle to hire more people, which might be okay, but it's because of that moment. If, you know, the exigency of that moment is to drum up Bumiputra sentiments, then suddenly GLC is about that. If we're in, you know, as we were perhaps in the late 80s, 90s, about booming GDP growth, then suddenly GLCs become about that and not about the other thing. So I think a consistency and clarity about what exactly GLC roles ought to be is fantastic and definitely something that is worth exploring. But on that point, on GLC and beyond, back to my earlier intervention about being focused and being outcome driven, Malaysia also, I think, lacks a clarity of what its new sources of economic competitiveness ought to be. Prof Jomo spoke very eloquently about how we failed when it came to, we have failed when it came to, when it comes to PV solar panels, and how we're not speaking it out, we're not, you know, making it more indigenous and being part of the production cycle to be Malaysian, so to speak. Palm oil, biodiesel, Islamic finance, we were supposed to be the champions in that. I don't see how, I'm not quite clear if we are anymore. It doesn't seem that we've grab opportunities that that were apparent over the last 10 years. And we are therefore stuck in what some people call the middle income trap. I feel that some brutal clarity, if I can just be quick, some brutal clarity on what the new sources of competitiveness are, and therefore channel everything, whether it's TVET education, whether it's GLC roles, whether it's government spending towards 2, 3, 4 areas of competitiveness would be wise. And to very quickly conclude, the point that Prof. Jomo described about ethnopopulism, I think I'm uniquely positioned to say a few words about that. I think it's you know, absolutely key that we recognize, as we have in the Trumpian era, that that's a reflection of how society operates. And for as long as we have people trying to, we have folks like hopefully us in this room trying to reduce the temperature, whether from within, like perhaps someone like me in a race-based party is, I persuade you to believe, trying to do, or somebody like YB Nick Nazmi who's outside that kind of race-based bubble is trying to do, to really empathize on the two poles, empathize both poles of Malaysian society and society in general, because I think ethnopopulism lives, the source of it is perhaps the frustration against capitalism and the failure of capitalism to you know, enfranchise a large segment of the population. And then what we need to do, therefore, to combat ethnopopulism is to give alternative narratives, which I think we are about to discuss after this, and some of the ideas I've proposed. So
thank you very
that's
much, Shahril.
Yeah.
We move on quickly to our last commentator, Prof. Aslam.
Right. Thank you very much, Syed. Thank you to all the speakers and also to the commentators. I'm being the last speaker, so I think, you know, a lot of things have been said. I'd like to just pick up a few points. You know, I fully agree with this idea that we have to look at options which are feasible. I think Jomo mentioned that. And I would like to combine that with, you know, with this discussion of what our preferred future is going to be. So if, for example, we can combine the two, our preferred future is also feasible, that would be great, right? But if our preferred future is not feasible at the moment, let's try to make it feasible. Of course, do it in a realistic way, where we are going to be looking at our current, you know, abilities and where we stand, and the fact that Malaysia is still a relatively small trading nation, and we are open to external influences. So I would like to hope that this, you know, series tries to actually to make that preferred future a feasible future. Now, for this purpose, I'd like to raise a point that was maybe not touched directly by the speakers, and that is the kind of system that we want to see in Malaysia. If I can just go to, you know, from an academic point of view, we would be teaching this in economics, the standard, you know, neoclassical economics that we teach in classrooms, which I think nearly everybody knows is not real. Yeah. So how can we make our preferred future a future in which we develop those things that we've been saying in all our reports for the last 20 years? We want to create a caring society. We want to create you know, this and that. And now we're talking about SDGs, and we want to make the development plan in line with SDGs. How do we do that, right? So I would have thought that we have to try to not only change the way we teach economics in classrooms, and then to also realize that outside. Now, how do we realize it outside? I believe there is a real need. I think nearly all the speakers say there is a important role for the state to play, yeah? In the economy, etc. But I would also like to think that another player should be the third sector in the economy. You know, the role of NGOs, civil societies, and then if I bring in Islamic economics, then we talk about institutions that we have which you know, have not been really promoted, and for example, one of them would be Waqaf or the pious endowments. Of course, you already have endowments and foundations playing a role in other countries in a big way, not so in the case of Malaysia. So I remember a few years ago we had this Malaysia, the slogan was for you, what is it? Something about caring society. There was this, which I thought was a great effort, but I don't know how far it has gone. So we need to try and promote this preferred future where this third sector can play a bigger role. And why this third sector? Because the third sector would probably be the best way to talk about doing decisions, making decisions that do not only think of your own individual self-interest. So maybe in that sense, in a way, it goes from what Shahril was saying. You're not talking about this neoliberal, system. Change the way you make decisions, not only thinking of yourself, but thinking of others. So your economic decisions should also have social impact. This would be well in line with the whole sustainable development and SDG emphasis being talked about by everybody. It's just a matter of how we do that, right? So I would say that this third sector should be something that we may want to think about the future, how we go about developing this. Last comment, just about jobs. A report that was maybe 3-4 years ago stated that almost 2/3 of the jobs that are being created are in the lower and lower middle categories, right? So if we are talking about GLC is going to create 15,000 jobs, what exactly are those jobs going to be, and which category are we talking about, right? I will agree fully that we have to move away from these low skill and low middle wage jobs, but how do we do it? And maybe just as an added point, what do we do with our huge number of foreign workers in the country, and of course the undocumented ones, right? Which probably is 50% or maybe more than that of the documented ones. So this job creation and and the idea to raise your wage rates, etc. How do we do that? I think that's another area for real concern. And we may have to have another session just to talk about that. Yeah. Maybe I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Prof. I'm sure we need many more sessions like this where we can zero into some of the aspects. Indeed, restructuring economy is a fairly broad subject matter. Now is the time for me to allow for the participants. I would like to first invite, we have Mr. Scott Jordan from Post Normal Time Center in the house. Mr. Scott Jordan. If I may allow 2 minutes for you.
Yeah, oh, thank you very much. Yeah, you can hear me, I assume. Yes. Good, okay, excellent, thank you. I want to thank all the speakers and the organizers for this event. It's really been enlightening and a wonderful evening. Prof. Farhana, I really liked the need for a new strategic plan, this idea of diversifying the economy. Prof. Tricia, GLCs have been on my mind. I think there's wonderful opportunity for new things to be done, and there's also a scary opportunity for evil to be done. So we really need to be thinking about these things. And Prof. Jomo, I'm really kind of struck by that lack of a historical mechanism to look at Malaysia, because when I look at the history of Malaysia, to me it's a history of capital. And so going back to ancient times, it wasn't the monsoon winds that brought people to Malaya, it was the goods and the trading and all of that. And so to me, you think about this, and so you have a rich history of diversity and multiple cultures coming together, capitalism developing alongside with Malaysia itself. And I look at it, and frankly, you don't have the well-oiled machine of economics that one would think to have, and you don't have this model of diversity and plurality that should also be there. And I mean, no one does. It's a human problem that we're facing, and we have these returns of nationalism and xenophobia happening all over the place. And so there's a weird contradiction that we're faced with, especially during COVID-19, when we're trying to rethink economic ideas. And so there's a fear now because everyone wants to be an isolationist, and we need to be able to develop everything within our own countries, because we can't rely on anyone, and we have to be able to lock down and still survive. But then what about international trade and international cooperation and all of the wonderful things that come with that? And so what I kind of want to pose, and especially focusing on inequalities, because I mean, if you read Piketty, it feels like inequalities are definitionally bound to capitalism, and that seems horrible. Why do we want a system that that has that definitionally, almost. And when we look to Shoshana Zuboff, who did the surveillance capitalism book, and the good senator had mentioned the digitization of the economy, and how do we prepare for that? So, you know, it's easy to kind of make the claim, and I completely agree that we need to abandon that Shahril had mentioned about abandoning neoliberal capitalism, and I would fully support that, but it's going to be very, you know, a lot of whiplash from that. And so how do we approach it? And so what I would like to ask the speakers particularly, but anyone who's open to it, and I think we should all be thinking about it, what are the problems with our current conventional thinking, and how do we reform that? So, because we have a way of thinking of things, and economists are as guilty as anyone of having a very, you know, structured way. What are the structural problems we face, maybe educationally, politically, or economically, and how do we overcome that? Maybe like what the top one is. All
right. Thank you very much, Scott. Farhana will have to make a move because she's attending her class at 10. And I also got a cue from Tricia. I would like to offer this opportunity to Tricia because there are quite a number of questions posed directly to Tricia. So perhaps maybe you would like to take a few minutes before you leave, Tricia.
Okay, thank you so much to everyone. Wonderful comments from the commentators and good questions as well coming in from the audience. I like the final question, I suppose, in asking like what are the problems of conventional thinking. So one of the things that I want to start this round of my comments are, and I hope I'll get as much as I can through before I need to leave, is that I think sometimes we approach things imagining that whatever policy solution we provide will result in the intended outcome that we believe it will. So we believe that what we prescribe will actually eventually allow us the outcome that we predict. And sometimes that's not always the case. Sometimes there are unintended consequences of a good policy measure or what we believe to be a good policy measure. So sometimes there are externalities that we cannot avoid. I mean, COVID-19 happened without anyone expecting that. So there are externalities, there are shocks, there are things that will happen that are sometimes out of our control. So let's just, you know, get that out of the way. I wanted to address one of the questions directed at me specifically, which was about why should we decouple the social mandate from a GLC role now at this time, and then how do we more efficiently roll out initiatives that rely on GLC participation and contributions? So I just want to say at the outset that, you know, I'm not fundamentally opposed to state intervention, and I think Shahril Hamdan put it rightly when he said that what we need is to be absolutely clear about what role it is that we want our state to play. So of course the state plays an important role, but what role do they play? And I think the state, so what does the state have? The state has capacity, right? The state has the ability to provide like a huge oversight. It has a bird's eye view of everything. It's able to provide a regulatory role for everything. It lays the groundwork. It provides a good basis, a foundation, a framework for everything else to rise up. It's as if like if you're a planter, you want the tanah to be, you know, to be fertile. You want it to be moist. You want there to be sunlight. So the government plays that role. And so that when the seeds actually are thrown, then it can grow, then it can flourish. But sometimes I think the state cannot always be there to make sure that you know, the padi is going to grow in this direction, in that direction, because there are certain factors that are out of their control. So my specific answer to that is yes, right now GLCs are playing a role in creating employment and digitalization, or at least that's what the government intends for it to achieve. But I think that if we are to make those jobs available and create like artificial jobs that aren't actually real jobs, then the problem is that in the long term, like what's going to happen with these people who are employed in artificially created jobs? Are they going to actually truly, you know, feel like they're contributing, or are they going to be left to languish in cold storage positions rather than truly contributing value to the GLC or value to the government? maybe the answer can actually be like flip the other way around. So like when you think about digitalization, and one thing that we're trying to do at Ideas is to actually be less ideological. So maybe that could be like my public message to everyone here, right? Because I've just recently come on as a CEO, and I'm trying to push the team to be much more evidence-based. So in a sense, we are not so ideological because we want it to be based on evidence to provide us what the policy solution will be.
Yeah.
So we're doing a lot of direct research and interviews and talking to the SMEs themselves. So the question could be flipped the other way around, right? Like if we think about the successful SMEs today that have been able to rely on digitalization. So all of you, we're all stuck at home now. I'm sure we have used Grab or Food Panda or Fave or any of these apps. These are super apps. Like what contributed to their successes? So, I guess the question is, all the successful apps that are out there, or all the successful SMEs that have digitalized out there, have they done so by getting certain like incentives from government, or was it some other factor that allowed them to progress to the state where they're at today? And some of the factors that we identified, and I think we've got like about 10 case studies that we're publishing soon, is that there needs to be, R&D, so innovation and collaboration into research and development, employee reskilling and empowerment, making use of abilities to know how these digital technologies are going to be used. There we can enhance, the MNC SME technology transfer and linkages. And so the role that government plays will provide like existing policy and regulatory framework, and that framework is what allows these SMEs to go forth and truly flourish and digitalize. The state can provide some initial funding. I think the government is doing well in providing some digitalization for IR, like a seed grant. But even then, the seed grant is also expensive for them to obtain.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I've answered that question, that group of questions. And then there's also some questions from the audience talking about fiscal policy and skills education, and we haven't really even touched on education policy at all, right? Sorry, are you asking me to stop?
No, it's okay. Carry on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I just wanted to like pivot a little bit to another set of questions, which is on fiscal policy, because we haven't really talked about that. And so one comment is that I think government's forecasts for next year's revenues are still a little bit circumspect. I think that is actually dependent on the assumption of COVID-19, going away. There's projections that corporate income tax will increase. There's projections that petroleum income tax will increase as well. It's premised on the belief that oil prices will go up from $40 per barrel to $42 per barrel. So I think those are a little bit rosy projections, but I think this is a time that government should be able to spend. And I think there were also some criticisms that in fact it was not as expansionary a budget as was expected. Okay. So I think I'll stop there. Yeah,
thank you very much, Tricia. I'm not sure whether Farhana is still here. Maybe
I'm actually about to step out.
Right. Would you like
sorry,
to say a few
regretfully.
Words? Yeah. Would you like to say a few words before you leave? Farhana nak komen sikit ke?
Yeah, boleh. Yeah, so thank you everyone for the questions and the thought, and I learned so much from the commentators and fellow speakers as well. I think there's a lot that has been said about the role of the state, right? And I think that once we have all agreed that is the case, then I agree with Saudara Shahril about knowing what are the problems and focusing very clearly where we headed, and then backward engineer also. And that's the kind of impression that I'm getting. So as much as we worry about the implications of the second best the second best choice, when we intervene, there's always problems with the government intervention. But I think where we can do slightly differently and think slightly differently is when we look at the government as not only people who are preparing the grounds for order, rule of law, and then to later on tax, but they also are latent innovative capacities, right? And even if the government can in fact recruit into the government, innovative capacity within the public sector sphere, and this is the key to having solid strategy for where we are heading, because not everything can be left to market, or in other words chances, because then there's no way for us to steer this structural problems, really long-term structural issues like wages and food insecurity, and things like that. So we know coming into COVID, we have so much structural problems that we are already embracing, things like lack of innovation, low wages, governance, all sorts of problems that are very archetypical of sorts for economies like us, like Thailand, like Philippines, even who's really struggling to break into this mold of post-colonial, premature deindustrialization and all sorts of things. So maybe yes, I would agree that that there's people say that nowadays the panacea to inequality and the world's biggest problems is shared value, stakeholder capitalism. How we cannot just wait for countries to tax and governments to redistribute tax money, because that's difficult, right? It's politically so difficult. Why don't we just grow the pie and then hope that the incremental pie will go to the bottom end of the food chain, right? But that in reality is not the case unless the government is very serious about post-market redistribution, like taxes, but also B, really directing, having a very strategic direction of where the economy could go, and then really, blasting some of the structural problems like rent seeking and then profiteering, fat profit in some areas that are just no longer productive for the economy. I hope I've articulated that as best as possible, but thank you so much. I unfortunately have to run to class because
you're already late.
On the other side of the world, it's only morning here.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, and Assalamualaikum.
Welcome, Farhana. Waalaikumsalam. She's already late for her class. I'm sure Prof. Jomo would also like to reflect, but Prof. Jomo is not going anywhere soon, right? So please hang on, Prof. You're still there. Let's allow for more robust discussion. There are so many questions from the participants. Amir Ali raised his hand, and in fact, any of the participants would like to ask direct questions on Zoom platform, you can also raise your hand. I would like to invite Amir Ali. Silakan, 2 minutes, please.
Assalamualaikum. Thank you very much, Brother Zaid.
Yeah.
And all the
2 minutes,
presenters and discussants. Okay, only 2 minutes.
Yeah.
I just would like to touch on the income disparity, which is a problem. Okay, whenever we got the minimum pay increased by 100 ringgit, you see the CEO salary increased by 1,000, the senior managers increased by 500. So poor guy who asked for the increment, but the beneficiaries are other people. So I would like to straight away suggest some measures, some measures that we may be able to implement. One is to introduce wage ratio. Wage ratio. Wage ratio. What is wage ratio? Is the difference between the highest paid person in the company against the lowest paid. Okay, and the other one is the highest paid against the average pay of the company, or the highest paid against the weighted average salary of the company. So you can have 3 ratios there. All right. One way to do it is perhaps all the public listed companies should declare. We shouldn't come up with any rule. You must not have above that. No, it's always relative. Okay. So, but then when CEO of a company realized that his ratio is so high, so he will feel ashamed. Okay? So this is one way of doing things, Number one. Number two, I can see that the savings rate in Malaysia is very low. without EPF contribution, we are nowhere.
Yeah.
Right? So I would like to also recommend that instead of giving just a cash bonus to people, to the staff, we also introduce equity ownership, bonus in terms of equity ownership. So in the future, apart from it being a retention policy, in the future, employees will benefit not only from salary, not only from cash bonus, but also from dividend. But because in the future you need dividend, but if we don't have the discipline of savings, I think this is one way of doing things. Okay, that's okay. And then I also would, do I have 30 seconds?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
20.
I also would like to, okay, being from private sector, okay, I would like to tell people that there is actually a difference between private sector and public sector. In private sector, we are asked to go and make money. Okay, revenue must be more than expenses. But being in the public sector for 22 months, I understand that you only do things deliverables. There's no such thing as having to crack your head to look into revenue. Some of the things. So, and then another thing is that in the private sector, those equivalent JUSA C and above in the private sector, they are actually on contract. If they don't perform, they are shown the door.
Yeah.
So it's no such thing as sending people to pull a division. There's no such thing as that in the private sector. It's the door, because just normally GMs and above, they are on contract basis.
Yeah.
So I think that's all from me. Thank you
very much, Mr. Amir Ali. I would like to go back to Prof. Jomo. I'm sure by now he has a lot.
Boleh tanya sebelum Prof. Jomo jawab.
Prof. Zan, Prof. Zan.
Soalan ni untuk Prof. Jomo juga. Izinkan saya tanya dalam bahasa Melayu. Soalan saya tanya untuk Prof. Jomo dan juga Shahril. Rata-rata semua pembentang dan juga komentator setuju bahawa kita perlukan government intervention. Tapi bagaimana kita nak memastikan yang government intervention itu yang amanah, transparent dan boleh tunaikan intervention. Kita tahu kita nak Vision 2020, wawasan 2020, tapi yang Prof. Jomo kata ia gagal kerana pihak government intervention itu gagal membawa ke arah yang kita hasratkan. Tapi saya worried about 2030. Kita memang hendak government intervention, tapi bagaimana kita memastikan government intervention itu membawa kita ke arah yang kita ditujukan. Terima kasih.
Prof. Fauzan sebut dua nama tu, Prof. Jomo dengan Shahril, tapi dia tak sebut Nik Nazmi, tak nak sebut.
Commentator dia. Dia kan belong to government. But it's okay.
Fine. Alright. Okey, saja usik Prof. Fauzan sikit. Tapi saya tak pasti nak bagi Shahril dulu ke nak bagi Prof. Jomo dulu ke. Saya silakan Prof. Prof. Jomo dulu, silakan Prof.
Terima kasih.
Dengar. Okey, boleh dengar.
Terima kasih atas soalan tadi. Saya jawab yang terakhir dulu dalam bahasa Melayu. Sebenarnya soal campur tangan kerajaan ini sesuatu yang cukup rumit, ya. Kita dapat lihat di mana-mana juga, kalau tidak ada kawalan, ya, sesuatu yang bermula dengan niat yang baik boleh menjadi boleh berubah. Oleh kerana itu amat penting apa yang dikatakan dalam bahasa Inggeris checks and balances. Tapi checks and balances itu yang kita maksudkan itu adalah kawalan, ya, bukan check dan balance bank. Tapi bagi setengah orang ni itu yang dipentingkan, ya. Jadi saya rasa kalau kita hanya bergantung pada soal niat dan sebagainya, walaupun penting, tidak mencukupi. Kita memerlukan sistem yang dapat mengawal. Kalau boleh saya mengalih balik pada isu-isu yang ditimbulkan tadi.
Silakan.
Today started off, ini webinar saya yang kelima, ya.
On this topic.
Dan kita sebelum kita mula tadi kita ada gurau, ya, sedikit. You still got energy. And frankly, this doesn't happen every day, lah. You know, it's exceptional because of the budget. But one of the things which keeps me going is precisely when I get dejected and I've come across two politicians like Nazmi and Shahril, who remind me that there is still hope. That there is still hope. Just at the moment I'm giving up in despair, there is still hope. Even though I don't agree necessarily with everything they said, but the thought processes and also the how they see what they are trying to do in the difficult context in which we are all living is, to me, it's inspiring.
Okay.
So I think the inspiration comes from you all as well. Now, one issue which came up earlier was the question. I want to go back to the question of foreign labor because it's, I think it was Richard Riot, who was Minister of Human Resources in the year 2014, who announced that at that time, the government estimate was 6.7 million foreign workers. The government acknowledged at that time 2.2 million. Okay, so we can assume that the 2.2 million were documented.
Yeah.
In other words, 4.5 million. 4.5 million are undocumented. Okay. So fast forward to the present time. Right? Today, the figure, the number of people who are recognized as being in the labor force today is less than 16 million. If we take away the 2.2 million or so, who are foreign, leaves about 13.5 million. Okay, Malaysian workers. To add to that, 6.5 million foreign workers. In other words, more than 1/3 of our labor force is foreign.
Yeah.
But we pretend as if they don't count. When we divide our per capita income, okay, our numbers go up by pretending that one-third of the workers don't even exist in this country, are not even contributing. And unfortunately, they are the worst paid, the worst treated, and then we want to deny them, and we are practicing very, very short-sighted policies. Very short-sighted policies. You remember the so-called second wave of COVID-19 in Singapore, because they ignored the problems of foreign workers who are living in very cramped conditions.
Yeah.
And that we are ignoring them. We are refusing to test them at our own peril. We are creating a huge danger for ourselves. I think we have to get away from this type of narrow, ethnic or nationalist, so-called nationalistic kind of thinking, and really begin to think much, much more universally about the human condition. So there are many other things which can be said, and I didn't deal with the whole question of the fiscal issue, partly because, frankly, that's all I've been doing with in the other 4 sessions today, as well as the 3 sessions yesterday. Nothing but belanjawan. So I'm a bit fed up, because half the time I'm still using belanjawan, but the younger generation, they don't know what belanjawan is. They kata budget. Okay? Tapi itu soal lain. But the point I want to make here is about the 4th point which Professor Aslam emphasized today, the question of knowledge. How do we think about things? So, for example, when we talk about food security, why do we still have the British understanding of food security that means tanam padi? Okay? Why did the British do that? The British did that because they wanted to maximize the foreign exchange contribution of Malaya to the British Empire. That's why they did it. They didn't want us to import beras from Siam, because Siam was not part of the British Empire. Burma, okay, boleh, tapi not Siam. So these were the kind of considerations. But almost 1 century later, we are still talking about food security in those terms. You take another thing. Just now, Senator Mael was talking about digitalization. Yeah? We don't even know whether it's digitization or digitalization. Tapi tak apalah. The point is that we have been talking about these issues since the 1980s.
Yeah.
Remember Tunku Azman being appointed the first head of MIMOS. I remember the discussions around multimedia super corridor that put together Putrajaya, there was going to be Cyberjaya. We have been talking about digitization for such a long time. It is not considered important until Klaus Schwab in Davos Economic Forum pronounces that it is a world priority. What is the difference between Industrial Revolution 4.0 and Industrial Revolution 3.0? Artificial intelligence? My friend Dr. Rosli Omar, artificial intelligence from the 1980s in the University of Malaya Engineering Faculty, and it already existed. Machine learning has been around for more than 4 decades. Okay, of course there are new developments all the time, like neural networks and so on. But we just get carried away, and our intellectual agendas, we are incapable of thinking for ourselves. We refuse to do anything about COVID-19 until Imperial College of London influenced Boris Johnson, and Boris Johnson changed the policy from herd mentality to a lockdown. Okay, and we saw how disastrous that was. In fact, when China announced that it had COVID-19, 4 days later, I remember that there was a Malaysian researcher on viruses, not COVID-19, but on flu viruses, who announced that we have the capacity to quickly develop testing and vaccination. But nothing happened. Nothing happened. The problem is that we do not even recognize our own strengths when they do exist. But instead we look, and we invariably look west. Despite 5 years or so of looking east, we are still looking west all the time. We don't recognize the important things. Take something like the word quarantine. Where does the word quarantine come from? It comes from the word quaranta. Quaranta is the Italian word for 40. Where did that come from? Because the Duke of Venice recognized that the Ottoman Sultan was introducing a quarantine when they were unsure about ships which were coming to Istanbul and so on. So we have a long history of a lot of these things, but we don't seem to recognize them until they are recognized in a particular way. I think we really have to get away from this type of colonial mentality and a mentality where we do not recognize our own thinking and so on. So I really want to get away from many of these kinds of issues, and begin to recognize that ultimately we have to be quite realistic, in terms of how we deal with many of our issues, and that's why to me the issue is quite pragmatic. I'll give you another example.
Yes, please.
Last few weeks, I have been arguing against all those people who says the government cannot borrow, Okay? But in the last few days, I've been very critical about the borrowing. Why? Not because I don't feel the governments cannot borrow, but rather because of what the money is going to be spent for. Okay, that is what is worrying me. What is the money being spent for? Look at the allocations for research and development. To go from research and development to making something viable will take years and years and years. We have to go with existing strengths, existing capacities, and move very, very quickly. We have to deal with contemporary realities. It is one of the contemporary realities. But the vast majority of Malaysians right now do not have healthy lifestyles, and many of our years of our life are going to be spent in a very unhealthy way. And whether it is insulin shots or whatever it is, this is a matter of public concern. But look at the allocation for NCDs, non-communicable diseases. It has gone down. I mean, in the middle of a problem, you take from one pocket and you put the money in another pocket. Okay, I agree, COVID-19 is the issue of the moment, but let's not forget that we have a whole range of other problems. Another problem which we have, due to global warming, we don't have enough water in the Padu Dam, which is the main dam for the water in the Muda region. Okay, 2016, the whole season, one whole season was cancelled because there wasn't enough water. And again last year. And we are not even beginning to think, we have, until COVID-19, we didn't even think very seriously about changing agriculture. When we want to solve our food problem, go to foreign companies and so on. Why can't our farmers be involved in producing far more food substances than food crops than has been the case so far? So we need to begin to think of these problems, you know. But unfortunately, we find, look at the number of plant breeders in Mardi. You know how many plant breeders are left in Mardi? I'm afraid that there's nobody left. 3 years ago, when I was experts, there was one man who said he was the only remaining plant breeder in Mardi, and he was going to retire. I don't think he has been replaced. I hope he has been replaced, but I don't think so.
Yeah.
So I think we have to begin to recognize that, you know, we have a underappreciation of our own capacities and contributions.
Yeah.
And we need to begin to move forward. But how is this process going to move forward? This is where I'm very, very worried about what is happening with the budget. The budget, of course, every budget is for the rakyat. Okay, every budget will be for the rakyat. Even if you're taking money away from the rakyat,
it's also for the rakyat.
Okay, and a lot of it is cheating people. Cheating people, because you have, for example, now you have direct taxation. Income tax kurang. The kadar income tax dah kurang. You have indirect taxation, okay, through the SST and GST, and then now back to SST. Okay, so the amount of money collected has also gone down, and we have a serious problem. But the problem didn't begin with this year. The big problem began many years ago, you know, and nothing has been done ever since. So ever since the Asian financial crisis of 1997, 1998, we have been in deficit, and it has been a growing deficit. And so how do we deal with all these problems together? You know, it's not going to be easy, you know. But right now, the way people are talking about it, unfortunately, what has become more important is the survival of this regime for the regime, and those people who want to bring it down at any cost. That's why, for me, it is heartwarming that the politicians in today's panel have a more enlightened view of things. But I really think that we really need to improve the quality of our. You know, there are far more important issues, and there is going to be a lot of damage. By having politicians as appointed as the chairs of all the GLCs, and then now asking them, you can more or less do anything you want, give as long as you can create jobs. What is likely to happen? What happens in the Philippines? Somebody becomes the mayor, his brother-in-law becomes the police chief, etc., and so on. This is likely to happen here as well. So the very poor governance which Tricia was talking about is going to become has been becoming far worse, and will become even worse with the mandate which is being given. So I think instead of the country improving after the 1MDB fiasco, we are now creating the conditions for many 1MDBs. You know, maybe we should call it many MDBs. And you know, unfortunately, this is not the way we learn. That's why it's important for me. It is very important for me that we have a much more considered discourse, and I'm very appreciative of the fact the organizers tonight have taken this initiative, and you have tried to keep it on course.
There'll be more discourse, inshallah, with regards to this, I'm sure. I would like to invite all the commentators to perhaps give maybe 2 minutes remark before we sum up. It's already 10:30. Two names has been mentioned. Tadi siapa? Shahril mentioned twice, once by Prof Fauzan, kemudian Prof Jomo. So I would like to begin with Shahril first.
Yeah, can I just say it's going to be a very easy night to sleep when someone like Prof Jomo says something complimentary. So thanks for that, Prof.
Jealous, bro.
on a more serious note, saya ingat Prof Fauzan pun ada tanyakan soalan, saya tak akan jawab panjang, ringkas je. Tak banyak yang saya boleh tambah daripada apa yang Prof Jomo rungkaikan tadi. Cuma untuk bersetuju 100% lah bahawasanya nombor satu, dari segi kekuatan sistem demokrasi itu mesti dipertahankan. Sebab itu secara peribadi bila idea macam darurat dan sebagainya memang saya tak setuju lah. Jadi saya harap semua ahli politik segenap spektrum akan sentiasa mendukung prinsip demokrasi ini setelah apa yang kita lihat beberapa tahun yang sudah. Jadi perkara itu saya ingat boleh membantu mengurus ataupun mewujudkan semak dan imbang atau check and balance yang disebut tadi, supaya segala perbelanjaan dan campur tangan dan intervensi kerajaan dalam sistem ekonomi itu kekal pada niat ikhlas yang diasaskan. Nombor dua, secara ringkas, bukan soal bersih, kotor dan sebagainya, tapi fokus perbelanjaan tu. Tadi saya dalam jawapan panjang saya beri sedikit gambaran lah Prof. Bagi saya kalau kerajaan tidak fokus, dia akan haphazard. Dan mungkin niatnya semua baik, saya nak ni, saya nak itu, saya nak perkasakan Bumi Putera, saya nak okeykan Sabah Sarawak, tapi there is no focus and coordination across different agencies and across the different actors inside government. Sebab kerajaan ni bukan seorang je kan, dia banyak branches. Saya harap ada prioritization. Area mana yang kita nak masuk, outcome apa yang kita nak buat, dan kita berani melaksanakan ke arah outcome tersebut. Itu saja.
Terima kasih Shahril. Shahril did mention to me, I hope it's not a secret. He mentioned that even within UMNO fraternity, since it's not regarded to be UMNO enough. So it's not UMNO enough. Okay, dah apa, different topic altogether. Kita pergi kepada ni, YB Nik Nazmi, 2 minutes, silakan YB.
Terima kasih. I think we have a good discussion tonight, and the important thing is political will lah. Sebab at the end of the day, there's a saying that you do not miss a good crisis, do not waste a good crisis. So we have COVID as a big and major crisis that in the country. So I think the government must take the opportunity, and because people are really suffering. I get calls from my constituents, orang bawa taxi, orang even we talk about the apps, but actually the riders, they are at the mercy of the companies. California has recognized this gig workers as actually being workers, but otherwise in other countries including Malaysia, they are not recognized as workers without much benefits. So we have to move in with the times. Our economic structure is still very much rooted in the NEP, and I think NEP has done a lot of good. It was very relevant for its time, and sadly in the treasury, and this applies even during Pakatan Harapan punya time, that orthodoxy, that fiscal hawk punya ni is very strong. Maybe it's the politician, but maybe it's also the civil service, and I think we have to do something about that. So that the government can really do a lot of things, because I think Tun Razak would never allow, he wouldn't have, NEP would not have been able to be implemented if we had this obsession with deficits that we have today. But I agree, any spending, any massive spending must be accompanied by governance and transparency, because there's no other way. Sebab ni duit rakyat, that when people want to see it being spent, they want to see it being done rightly. So I think that is very crucial moving forward.
Terima kasih YB. I would like to invite Yang Berhormat Ismail. 2 minutes.
Kenapa?
YB Ismail, ada tak? If not, maybe Prof Saadiah. Silakan Prof. Prof Saadiah ada lagi? Okay. Prof Fauzan, unmute. Takut mute.
Tak mute. Sorry.
Mute.
Shock ni tadi cakap okay.
Yeah, Prof,
okay, I would like to refer to some of the questions on SDGs. I sense some kind of macam despair, especially from the young people, and I'd like to say that no big economies have the answers. of course, we are blessed to hear from Prof. Jomo, from his experience. But even when I was listening to all these discussions, you know, even the big enough economies and big politicians may not have the answers. But what we could do to our society is if we could at least give the future generation, make sure that we have a peaceful, amicable process, that we can all take part in it, and let's have some hope. And I feel that the future lies in having a forum where we could engage and build on the basis of hope and humanitarian values. And this is not, we can't say that this is idealistic thinking, this is Pusuratan Melayu ke, literature ke, because all this is part of what we call social capital. And in the economic development discourse, more people are talking about the importance of social capital, and research shows that, and by social capital, if you could say that these are networks with shared norms and values and understanding that facilitate, you know, the cooperation between people. And this is quite intangible. We don't see it, but it's so important. And that can explain the difference between why some economies are doing much, much better. Say Nordic countries or New Zealand, in balancing between the power of the market and democracy and the work in the social space. So I think for Malaysia is also to look at where we are in terms of social capital, and to have tools that measure the social capital. And what we mean by we have to have the rakyat having trust of the politicians, peaceful coexistence, hope, credibility, governance, all that is important. So when we talk about economic development, we need also to be thinking about social capital.
Terima kasih. Yes, yes, Senator, sila.
Yeah,
sorry. Tadi mute. Sila.
Okay, very quickly. Thank you, Syed.
Yeah, sila.
Yeah, actually, I'm really stunned when I listen to Prof. Jomo, you know, talking about the numbers of foreign workers, you know, in this country, and when we total up the numbers, we add up with the employees, jumlah pekerja yang kita ada, and with the pandemic now, you know, we are talking about people not only losing job, but the demise of job. I think we need to emulate a new notion, you know, because I think bagi saya, mantra that, you know, individuals are guaranteed an employment security as long as they continue to keep their skill relevant, and I think this notion has rapidly becoming obsolete. So I would like to propose that we need to emulate skill future movement initiative, like what done in Singapore, to empower the employees, those individuals, to take charge of their learning skills and career to achieve personal aspiration throughout their life. Maybe, you know, looking into developing individuals for an entrepreneur professional leadership career as an alternative and a more sustainable human capital development model. Maybe person like Prof. Aslam, who in the academia, may look at to design this kind of module for the new generation that now at the college and university. I think that's all from me. Thank you, Syed.
Ya, terima kasih banyak, Senator. Let's move on to Prof. Aslam. I would like to invite Prof. Aslam to have the final say, because I think the idea behind having the topic of restructuring economy comes from him. So silakan. It's so broad that perhaps maybe we are not able to conclude unless we have a building blocks for future teams. Silakan, Prof. Aslam.
Terima kasih, Syed. Thank you everybody for your inputs. I think my comments not going to be any more on the topic, but more as a kind of you know, looking forward. What should we do? You know, when we were planning this session, we initially wanted to have it about a month ago, but we couldn't get the you know, everything to come in. So we we proposed today, and I remember asking Prof. Jomo, should we go on because of the budget and so on? And I think he said, just go ahead, do it, and then we'll see how it goes. And so we decided to go ahead. And I'm very happy that we did it, because I think we've really had a very good discussion, more than 2 hours now. And we're still having almost 120 people with us right to the end. This session was meant to just brainstorm ideas. Yeah, it was meant to let people talk about anything that they wanted to say, and then also from the questions and from the commentators and participants who either spoke or who sent it through the chat. It's now the work of us to look at what has been proposed. I know, for example, Ami Ali had a few questions on inequality and savings rate. I think it's very important. These ideas of wage ratio proposal is very interesting. And I think all of this is meant so that we can have sessions that will be like this again, maybe in economy or in other areas, political science or environment or whatever the area may be. So this will be type 1 type of programs where it's more general. What we are hoping to do is, from the discussion that we've had today, we will try to identify maybe 1 or 2 of the topics that may require a more detailed discussion. So it may just be on one issue, and then we have another session where the discussion will be much more detailed. So maybe no giving 5 minutes to Prof. Saadiah. We may give her more time, or we won't give 5 minutes to politicians. I know it's very tough for them to keep, and what more academics, right? To give them 5 minutes, they're not easy. So we may have other sessions, maybe in the form of futures workshop, that we have been doing, that tries to develop our preferred feasible future. If I can combine with Jomo's thing, preferred feasible future, and come up with these futures in a more organized and systematic way. So I think that's our plan. And for now, I think as organizers, Futures Malaysia, we have to sit down and try to work out what are those topics that we may want to have in the next few sessions, as well as what could be the workshops that we want to have, where we come up with much more details, which could even have policy implications. I think this is what we are hoping to do. Yeah. So again, I'd just like to thank everybody. We look forward to the next one, and thank the moderator because he will end, but thank him for being he was a moderator, so that's why we may have gone above our 10:30, but our 10 o'clock, but I think it's fine. We may need to relook at it. Yeah? Thank you once again, and I send it back to Tuan Said.
Given all this audience and speakers, I'm not a moderator. I consider myself to be a timekeeper, Prof. Aslam. Nothing much can be said. Nevertheless, thank you everyone, especially Prof. Jomo. Yes, saya, Dr. Roslan.
Meredith Wills.
Yeah, of course.
From New York.
All right.
Thank you to all panelists and discussed excellent and thought-provoking ideas and commentary and real benefit of COVID that I can attend this seminar in Malaysia, even I'm from United States, from New York actually. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. We have audience from all over the world. Hope for everyone to stay tuned.
She's here. If you want to say something.
Yeah. Prof. Meredith. Silakan. Oh, I'm speaking Malay to her. Prof. Meredith.
No, nothing to say. Just this is really great. Thank you so much, and it's nice to see colleagues and everyone else. So it's wonderful that these are happening, these discussions. So, thanks.
Thank you, Professor. Of course, ada juga Prof. Agus katanya ada, belum sempat berbicara. Dan special thanks to Prof. Jomo. This is his 5th webinar for today. It's almost 11 p.m. Yeah, and of course, Farhana and Tricia, our speakers and commentators as well. Please stay tuned for more to come from Futures Malaysia, and on behalf of the organizer, thank you very much for your time.
Right. Besides economic, we also want to discuss about social dilemma, the digitization, like Prof. Jomo said. Is another topic. Thank you.
In the future, inshallah. So please stay tuned. I think there'll be more information from the organizers soon. Check your inboxes from time to time. So for now, terima kasih semua. Kita jumpa lagi. Assalamualaikum dan di sini selamat malam.
And good morning in New York.
Good morning.